Well, I've been working on procedural level generation tools recently, and hence proceduralism has been on my mind a lot. It's funny to think about in retrospect, but I've always had a fascination with procedurally generated art and the tools that go into making it. I think the very first thing of note that I ever built as an engineer was way back in 2014, which, God, that was a decade ago now. Oh boy. But yeah, it was a terrain generator and it created height maps out of Perlin noise and it took in user input to sculpt the terrain as you wanted. And yeah, it was a pretty cool tool. I enjoyed making it, and I think that was sort of my gateway into being a game developer. I think that was my thesis project when I was in university. And yeah, I think I'm not alone in this fascination with procedural generation, right? Like, it's why games like No Man's Sky had such a massive hype around it, and why videos on procedurally generated worlds using like wave function collapse and other proc gen techniques do so well on YouTube. There's just something that's really fascinating about the idea of building worlds and universes with code that the human mind finds really engaging for some reason, right? And you can see that same thing now with the wave of AI generation tools like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, and I think they scratch at that same itch. Anyway, going back out to my sort of experiences with ProcGen, immediately after finishing that terrain generator, I recall that the next project that I wanted to work on was a planet generation tool built in Ogre 3D. If you know what that is, like, yeah, you're probably an old fuck just like me. And so, anyway, looking back, that was kind of hilarious because it was so incredibly optimistic, over optimistic for my skills at the time. It's like, the folly of youth. That obviously didn't pan out, but my interest in proc generation sort of persisted over the years. And some other interesting projects that I've worked on are a procedural spaceship generator, a tool to create procedural textures directly from meshes, a bunch of random objects in Houdini, like doing all sorts of weird stuff like spawning ivy on buildings, creating random rocks, and all kinds of good stuff like that. And a story that I don't think I'll ever forget was from 2017 or 2018, right after I finished the procedural spaceship generator. And I recall feeling so proud of it and so accomplished at the end result. And I was at my desk during the lunch hour of my day job at the time. I was a technical artist at a game studio. And one of my colleagues, Matthew, he was a character artist, and he walked over to me as I was just kind of working, and he asked me what I was working on. And I, filled with whim and vigor at this amazing thing that I just finished, showed him a bunch of different spaceships that you could create with the procedural spaceship generator. And I thought to myself, like, oh, he's gonna be so impressed. And his response, which will stay with me until the day I die, was, oh, that's neat, I guess. But all the spaceships look like shit. God. Anyway, I recall feeling rather hurt at the time, and I think I actually kind of stopped talking to Matthew after that, and I left that job soon after, so I don't think I ever seriously got to engage with Matthew on why he thought the spaceships looked like shit. But I've thought about that moment a lot over the years, and I've continued to build tools for art and game development, and I think I've started to understand the problem and why Matthew responded the way that he did. I think the core of the problem wasn't necessarily aesthetic, right? Like, the spaceships that the tool generated did look somewhat passable, and you could probably use them for like background props in like a space scene or something like that, right? But the true problem, however, was that Matthew was a skilled character artist, right? Like, he wasn't just some Yahoo. Like, he knew what he was talking about. This man was like a triple A character artist, and way more talented at art than I will ever be, probably. And I think the actual issue was that he, as someone who was familiar with the process and the fundamentals of art, as opposed to someone like me, who was much more of an engineer who dabbled in art now and then. And what Matthew didn't see when he looked at the spaceships that this procedural generation tool created was any sense of artistic intention. To his skilled artistic eye, they were just a bunch of vague sci-fi looking meshes and greebles that were jumbled together in order to assemble something that kind of looked like a spaceship in the broad silhouettes of it. And this might look like a spaceship to me, But to Matthew, it looked like a hunk of junk thrown together by an algorithm. And I think this story summarizes the power and the perils of procedural and AI generated art almost completely. As an engineer and as someone who has a fascination with technology, I think it's tempting to imagine that we can outsource the problem of building art that satisfies the mind and the eye to the algorithm, right? But over the years, as I've been building more and more things and working on more art and creating games, I think I've learned that true art and aesthetic satisfaction requires intention above all other things. I can write a proc gen tool or an AI art generator that can churn out a million different variations of a texture or a mesh or an image. But 9 times out of 10, the end result, while it might look aesthetically interesting, it will lack the true intention that forms a through line for a piece of art, right? Like, it doesn't matter how technically impressive the end product is. If there's no intention or no message that the art was intended to communicate from the artist to the viewer, yeah, like it'll eventually ultimately fall flat, right? Like, beautiful pixels do not equal art. And the real true beating heart of a piece of art is the message that it was meant to communicate, and the story that it was meant to tell, and the impression that it is trying to leave the viewer with, right? In the hands of a skilled artist, a stick figure drawing can have emotional resonance. And this is why, as I learn more about how to be an artist and what I need to improve in order to take my art to the next level, I think the thing that I need to keep in mind is don't focus on the aesthetics, ignore the technology. Think about what emotions I am trying to convey, right? Like, what does this make me feel when I look at it and I experience it? And then work backwards from there. And then who knows, maybe 10 years from now, I'll be able to make a spaceship by hand, model it and everything, and texture it, and I'll show it to Matthew, and he'll look at it and say, that doesn't look like shit. And that's all I could ever hope for. Thank you for watching.